The boring reality is the fact that being a man or woman comes with a distinct set of advantages and disadvantages, where men are seen as more disposable as well as more competent. On the flip side, women are seen as less competent, but they are seen as more precious. So a woman's life is often seen as more precious, more deserving of being saved.
George TheTinMen
is widening perspectives around men by having uncomfortable conversations and revealing the
unpopular other half of gender equality in men's mental health.
Often we see data saying like 99% of rapists are men, which is true, where in the UK, where I live, it is legally impossible for a woman to commit rape. So it doesn't matter what a woman does, she might use drugs, a weapon, none of that will be rape. If we're going to say a woman's outfit doesn't justify sexual harassment against her, which it does not, then neither should a man's gender validate assault against him. Things like 1 in 5 male suicides in the UK are caused by relationship breakdown and child custody battles, but that is a totally understandable reason to end your life. So we reject your lazy suggestion of men can talk, men can cry, because it doesn't work, and it hasn't worked. The rates are still the same, often they're going up, so clearly it's not working. So let's try something else. Let's actually try listening to what men have got to say. How about that? That'd be nice. Not to say men can talk, and sticking our fingers in their ears when they tell us things we don't want to hear.
Is male privilege a thing? 2024.
I mean, one of the good things I like to do on my page is present people with solutions. So when it comes to male privilege, the solution to me there is very simple, to call it male privileges. So the addition of the S, male privileges, because there are male privileges, but male privilege is not an absolute thing, because there are male privileges and male disadvantages, and there are female disadvantages, and guess what? Female privileges. So yes, I would caveat it by saying there absolutely are male privileges, but male privilege as an absolute ubiquitous term, no, that doesn't exist. It's a very complicated thing. Privilege is a two-way street, and often the privilege is on two sides of the same coin. So the boring reality is the fact that being a man or woman comes with a distinct set of advantages and disadvantages, and it's a bit more complicated than, one big catchphrase to throw out on Twitter. So no. Male privileges, yes. Male privilege, no.
Yeah. What do you think you see are some of those examples, I guess, then, before we dive into maybe some of the male disadvantages in the world, what are some of those things that are the privileges that a man has in the world?
I think to a lesser extent, but still so, men are often seen as more competent than women, and a lot of time undeservingly so, especially in like the workplace, for example. Especially in certain areas where you're just treated as more competent, more reliable than a woman is. But that is thankfully becoming less true. But then again, if I were to say that to a dad, like my brother-in-law, for example, he's a new dad, and he's absolutely treated as less competent than his wife, my sister. So it really depends on what we're talking about. I'd say men are treated in general more competent in the workplace, women more competent at home, at school with children. Both of those are related to different types of sexism, which is exactly my point. But although male privileges do exist, I feel like we've identified them, and we have quite rightly and successfully combated a lot of them. So in general, I like to summarize it as in one sentence, which is men are seen as competent but disposable. So that means obviously we're seen as more competent. If you want someone to help reverse a truck out your driveway, get a man. That's what you want. You're looking for a man to help you because we're seen as more competent, which is not true. But the price of competency is disposability, where men are seen as more disposable as well as more competent. On the flip side, which is, like I said, the flip side nature of privilege, women are seen as less competent in the way I described, but they are seen as more precious. So a woman's life is often seen as more precious, more deserving of being saved than a man's life. And that's obviously male disposability again. So men are competent and disposable, women are incompetent or seen as incompetent, but precious. And that's my sort of, in a nutshell, sexism from society for you.
So does that come from, like, that's where that phrase, the value of a man is built, whereas the value of a woman, they're kind of born with, sort of thing? Is that kind of what you're kind of touching on there, where society sees it that way a little bit?
It's just difficult speaking catchphrases because I feel like there are certain places where a man does have to prove his worth. But then I feel like there's plenty of women that are trying to enter male-dominated spaces, especially, like I said, at work, where they have to prove their worth and might even have to prove their worth more than a male colleague would. So there are women and men listening to you say that will both agree and disagree simultaneously,
Yeah.
and both will be right to disagree and agree simultaneously, because it really depends on who you are, what we're talking about. But absolutely, like I said, my brother-in-law, who's an absolutely wonderful man and a great father, he's been raising his child for like 4 years now, and he's never been invited to like the playground girls group, the women's group that all wait outside the playground for their kids. He's never once been spoken to, and he's a wonderful guy and a great dad, and it's like he's not been accepted. So I feel like he has to prove himself more than a mother would. Whereas maybe one of his mothers go back to work, she might have to prove herself more than a male colleague. So
Yeah.
it really depends on the context, unfortunately.
Yeah. Would some of those situations potentially be truthful in the fact of like biology and things like that? Like I know a lot of people will talk about the conversation around why maybe like females are better at being the nurturer, the carer, because they are the birther of the child sort of thing. Do you think there comes some point where then you go, okay, well, on average, we're going to see a female be more competent at that role because it's just a more natural thing to occur?
I'll put my cards on the table. I'm not a dad. I've got no children, so I'm probably going to stumble into a lot of ignorant things when I answer this question. So here's your preemptive apology for that. Yes and no. I mean, in general, in the very early years, a mother is probably more important than a dad, largely because she can feed the baby more effectively than the dad, in terms of like breastfeeding and stuff like that. Later in life, I would say equally important. I would say dads are extremely important in socializing children, especially boys. And in a generation of boys, especially a generation of boys growing up without a father, we're all paying the price for that, because boys who don't have dads more often pick up a knife or join a gang, or go off the rails, get suspended, misbehave in school, become violent more often, and that's the price we all pay. So it's difficult to argue that mothers are more important to children when, as a society, we're all paying the price of the devastating impact of fatherlessness. And there are things that, although mothers are biologically in general more attuned to certain types of child caring, and that is important in its own right, so are fathers. I mean, things like roughhousing, for example, is something typically done by fathers, and usually towards boys. And roughhousing, despite being seen as like a toxic thing, boys will be boys, roughhousing is actually an extremely important part of a child's upbringing. It teaches children, again, especially boys, the importance of touch. Like, boys grow up with only two types of touch: fighting and sex. And if it's not those two types of touch, a boy doesn't understand it. But roughhousing from fathers introduces those boys to a whole gamut of different types of physical play and touch, boundaries, communication, consent. So those are lessons typically taught by fathers to boys through roughhousing, and I'd say they're hugely important, as important as mothers, and fathers are as important as mothers too. Really, again, it really depends on who we're talking about and when. Like I said, I'd say at the very beginning, you need mothers perhaps more than fathers, if only just for like the breastfeeding side. But in general, I would say equally important. And all you have to do is look outside and look how much gang violence, knife crime, suspension, exclusion, falling behind in school, homelessness, addiction, suicide, mental health issues. These are all positively correlated with fatherlessness, and shows that a boy without a father is more likely to go off the rails in one of the ways I described.
Do you think that's something that could be like reconciled with just proper male role models in their life as well, which we could, dive down the route of, the schooling system that's massively female dominant, and then like where, if a boy doesn't have a dad, where are they finding this source of information and this, talking about the touch, the consent, all these other factors here? Like, where else are they going to get it from? Is that really even enough in itself? If they do get that, is that still enough compared to a father?
I mean, I mean, all my questions, unfortunately, are going to be underlined with the same sort of caution around context. It really depends on context. Like, I'd say the most important male role model in the vast majority of children's lives has to be the father. But you are also right to look at the fatherlessness crisis as a part of a much wider problem of a huge societal lack of positive male role models for boys, not just fathers. But you're right. 80% of teachers, especially in early years primary school, and even more so in kindergarten, are women. Like, I think in America, the fact is there are more women flying military jets as a share of the population in the American military than there are men teaching kindergarten. So that disparity is actually twice as big for men in teaching kindergarten as it is women flying military jets. And there aren't many women flying military jets, let's put it that way. So think about how few men are teaching kids in kindergarten and in primary school less so in high school and perhaps about 50-50 in university, but a huge lack of masculinity and positive male role modeling at the earliest possible stage, right throughout a child's life. So, I mean, I got to year 6 before I had a male teacher, and he left after 1 year, and then it was like the whole school was women. And about 1 in 4 schools in the UK are all women, no male teachers whatsoever in 1 in 4 schools. And about 1 in 5 children in America are growing up without any father at home. So there are millions and millions and millions of boys right across the world that have no father at home, go to school, have no man in the classroom or in the entire school. And they'll turn on TV and they're confronted with all this like bigoted rhetoric about toxic masculinity and the patriarchy and men are violent and men are oppressive. And it's like, well, there's no positive male role model there. And so who do they go to? They go to the few people that are willing to talk about masculinity in a positive way, like Andrew Tate, who I don't agree with, but he is clearly a symptom of a much wider problem. He has just stepped into this massive power vacuum where men and boys are being betrayed by a lack of fathers, a lack of male role modeling, and a lack of positive discussion within feminism and gender equality discourse more widely. And Andrew Tate has capitalized on it. I've always said that his meteoric success is exactly proportionate to our failure, especially on the left. So yeah, there's a massive lack of role modeling. We all pay the price as a society in the way I described, especially for gangs and people like Andrew Tate just grift and exploit these men and tell them what they want to hear. And no, I don't like Andrew Tate. I'm more than happy to say that. But he is clearly a symptom of a much bigger problem.
So you're saying like he kind of is showing that men are lacking and they're searching for something, and then they went, oh, there's something, I'll take it.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, like anyone, men are just looking for a sense of belonging and a sense of leadership and a sense of understanding and compassion. Like a lot of it's looking for family. That's why so many boys from fatherless homes do join gangs, because they're looking for that sense of leadership and a male role model and a sense of belonging and a sense of family and a sense of purpose. They don't find at home because there's no father there. The youth clubs have been closed down right across like the UK. So they'll pick up a knife and join a gang. And that gangs specifically target boys, not just like knife crime gangs, but terrorist groups, for example, like white supremacists, ISIS, and notoriously target fatherless boys. Even like school shooters, like huge correlations with fatherlessness. And it's totally antithetical to the narrative we're told, where we're told masculinity is the problem, and masculinity is not the problem. The problem is the exact opposite. The problem is a complete lack of masculinity in these boys' lives, positive masculinity, positive male role models, and like these boys are growing up without them. So the consequences are quite clear. So no, the problem is not a lack of masculinity. The problem is we need more positive fathers, positive male role models in the lives of boys.
Yeah, it's interesting because I always talk about the term toxic masculinity and kind of just be like, well, like it shouldn't even be a thing. Like it's because there's nothing toxic about masculinity. So therefore, what gets put under the barrier or under the slogan toxic masculinity is actually not masculinity. That's just someone being a prick or like so like it's actually not a masculinity at all. So putting it in that basket then makes men even more confused because they're kind of like, well, what part of masculinity do you want me to be when that's not even the case?
Yeah, it's all upside down, back to front, and doesn't make sense if you really look at it. Like Michael Gurian, who's a great author on masculinity, he wrote, "The most dangerous man is not the man of power. The most dangerous man is the man that feels powerless." And it's so true. Like this really this cartoonish view of toxic masculinity, which is I suppose like a big, powerful alpha male type man. Like Patrick Bateman from American Psycho type guy, that's sort of the archetype of toxic masculinity. But then if you looked at the reality of who are the most dangerous men in America right now, they're a bunch of young, disillusioned, mentally unwell boys. They're the ones that are shooting up schools and committing the biggest mass murderers in history. And those are not Patrick Batemans. They're completely opposite to your sort of archetype of masculinity. And they're obviously disillusioned, mentally unwell boys that feel powerless and have sort of been left behind. So this idea of toxic masculinity is wrong for so many reasons. Partly, like I said, it just mischaracterizes the problem. The problem is not about power. The problem is not like violent men, abusive men have very little power. Like domestic violence, for example, which is another sort of personification of toxic masculinity. anyone that understands domestic violence knows the men and women in those relationships have no power at all. Like, they're often from quite poor socioeconomic groups. They're not oppressive. They're not controlling society. And like, it's a very low resolution, divisive, cartoonish view of everything: social issues, domestic violence, masculinity, and we just need to do better.
So a lot of time you think that the things that are pointing to toxic masculinity kind of come under from someone that is insecure or lack of, and they don't feel good enough, or maybe they got bullied at school or left out and all these other factors, fatherless home, and so therefore they're kind of trying to they want to feel something, they want to feel like they're in control a little bit, and then they pursue these actions.
Yeah, I feel like it's a lack of meaning, lack of purpose, and like you said, a lot of the I got into an argument, one of my many arguments on social media, about Jackson Katz, who's a world-leading expert supposedly on masculinity, and he was characterizing school shooters as fundamentally about masculinity. The reason why 99% of school shooters, 97%, but 99% of school shooters are men and boys, is fundamentally about masculinity. And I'm like, but the vast majority of men and boys are not school shooters, and are absolutely appalled by school shooters. Like, we're talking 99.9999999% of everyone hate school shooters, nothing to do with them. And why should we characterize masculinity by the actions of 0.00001% of men who are just horrifically mentally unwell, destabilized? And I feel like people like Jackson Katz are just exploiting those mentally unwell men and boys to prop up their own political agenda. And there was nothing masculine about those boys, and men are not responsible for their actions. Like, I pointed out where practically 100% of neonaticides, which is basically when you kill a newborn baby, 100% of them, more or less, are by women. That doesn't mean it's fundamentally about femininity. That doesn't mean we should be careful about leaving babies with mothers. That does not mean femininity is about killing your child, in the same way that masculinity is not about killing school children. These are just low-resolution, bigoted, highly stupid worldviews that somehow are coming from our so-called experts. I'm like, you must be living in a cartoon world if you genuinely believe that. It's too stupid to be offensive, thankfully, but it's still extremely stupid. And the fact that Jackson Katz can honestly say this on the Men's Issues podcast, Man Enough, is shocking, but also not surprising, because that's just what we've got to get used to, unfortunately. But no, masculinity is absolutely not a problem. Masculinity in many ways is the solution, and we need a lot more of it, a lot more positive male role modelling, and less of this stupid thought experiment nonsense from Jackson Katz.
I feel like it just comes across like, as well, like in the media, then if that's what that message is being portrayed as such a missed opportunity, just say, like, show the case where there was a school shooter, and an example, there was, I can't remember the exact story, but in America, and the young guy tried to put a stop to it, and he ended up dying. Like, label that as masculine, label that as this masculine young man put his life at risk, lost his life trying to save others, rather than using the toxic masculine term when someone does something wrong. We can try and channel the meaning and change it in the minds of young men. Yeah.
I mean, we only ever gender the bad things men do. That's just quite clear. And that's not right, because, that's fine. 99% of the time, the person holding the knife or the gun is a man. But guess who? What's the sex of the people stepping in to help that person, laying down their lives, sacrificing themselves to stop the gunman? They're also men too. And it's like, a great way to look at it is 9/11, for example. Obviously, one of the most horrific terrorist attacks in history. I think, what was it? 19 all-male hijackers took control of his planes. All 100% men did that attack. And, toxic masculinity, men are violent, men are dangerous. But 344 firefighters from New York lost their life on that day as well, sacrificed their life running to his buildings, never came out again. They were all men as well. Like, 100% of those were men. 344 men, firemen, died to save men, to save people, Americans. That wasn't seen as heroic masculinity, but the actions of these 19 male terrorists, that's toxic masculinity or patriarchy or male violence or whatever nonsense you've got to say about it. So, it's interesting how we only ever gender the bad things men do, never acknowledge the good. Like, whenever a man does something good, like steps in to save someone from a knife attack, they're never gendered. They're not gendered like a knife man or gun man. They're seen as a passerby or a good Samaritan or local hero, and their gender is often removed. So we gender the bad knife man, and we take away the gender of the saviour, good Samaritan or bystander or stranger or member of the public. It's an interesting thing. If you actually look at that from now on in the news, it's amazing how clear it is that we degender the good and then gender the bad.
Why do you think the media does that? Like, it would seem like an easy sort of thing to do to try and make a positive impact on the world, to flip it the other way.
It's just easy, isn't it? It's easy, and people just like gobble it up. Like, shitting on men is just good for business. Clearly, like, it's widely accepted. It's good for clicks. People don't push back. The things that people say about men in the news are horrifying, and you would never get a man in the news saying that about a woman. And if you did, you'd expect him to get a huge amount of backlash. So the media get away with it because they can, and the media get away with it because people buy those newspapers or click those links, because it's just, it feeds into our bloodlusted culture war where anything and everything seems to be about attacking men, blaming men at any and all costs about anything you possibly want. So, I mean, the media just give you what you want to read. That's the beautiful thing about the free market, is that they give us what we want. Like, there's a famous quote about democracy from Edward Albee, who I made a documentary about, and he said, democracy can be whatever you want, but we always end up with what we deserve. And I feel the same about the media, is that we end up with what we deserve. Like, they give us what we want and what we buy. So change starts with us, to stop buying those rags and start demanding higher level of integrity and honesty from our media, including social media as well.
Yeah. Well, if you're not tapping into someone's content, let's just call it under that blanket term of content, then they're not going to be able to continue to put that out there, because they're not going to have the funds to do so. Like, so you stop watching the news if you don't like that sort of how they're portraying it, you don't like the newspaper, or you don't like that specific creator. Well, that then starts to get the ball rolling in them not being able to continue to produce content that way.
It works both ways. I mean, things like body standards and fashion around women, especially toxic ones, like in the tabloid newspapers, the classic red tops, where you'll see a photo of some female celebrity and there's like that red circle around some cellulite on her leg. Like, those are really toxic. That's a horrible thing to do to anyone, especially on like a front page newspaper. And everyone demands that they stop. And I'm like, well, who do you think's buying these newspapers? Who do you think? It's probably women. I don't think there are many straight men buying these papers. So it's odd, I'm blame for that as well. And I'm like, if there was such a thing as toxic femininity, I would say looking into sort of glamour mags and the way they portray women, women's body standards, women's fashion, that would be toxic femininity. It's like that classic tweet where someone was like, male privilege is being able to wear the same outfit twice and never getting a comment. And then someone responded, like, there's not a single straight man in the world that gives a shit if you wear the same. We honestly don't care. Like, that is a you problem. And like, leave us out of it. Like,
I wouldn't even know.
Like, if we want toxic body standards to stop against women, perhaps we should stop buying those shitty, glossy glam mags that are literally billion-dollar industry that you are buying, that women are buying. Yeah. That's how you stop it. Like,
it's interesting. I'm as a PT, as the day job sort of thing, and I was speaking with one of my female clients the other day, and I asked her this because she was talking about some of her insecurities in these things, and she was like, "Oh, I don't want to, I don't have a spray tan on, I don't want to, wear shorts in the gym at the moment." And I'm like, okay, so like, where is this where is this insecurity coming from? Who do you care that sees you this way? I was like, is it men? Is it women? Is it who is it? And she goes, it's my friends and it's women. She's like, I don't give a shit what the dude thinks. And I'm like, well, right, there you go. Like, it's, I'm standing there as a bloke, like, saying to her, I'm like, I would not care. 110% would not care. And neither would any other bloke probably in the gym. It's like, and probably neither do the women, maybe either. But like, maybe sometimes it's a false perception in your own mind as well.
I was talking about this to my girlfriend yesterday when we've been watching Married at First Sight, the Australian version. It's crazy. Yeah. And there's so many women on there. Like, I'm literally watching them behind the scenes in their flat, no makeup on, not in their pajamas, look great. And then they turn up on the end of the episode bit and they've got all their makeup. I'm like, I literally don't recognize them. I'm like, who are you? Yeah. Which one is that? Which one is that? I don't know. And I'm like, why do so many women feel the need to cake their face in makeup in this way, have Botox and lip filler? They look obscene, in my opinion. And I don't think most men want that. I don't think most men want like a face covered in makeup. I think most women do that for other women. I think that's who they're trying to impress. At that
100%.
level, it's mainly for most men just want to leave on time. We don't want to be waiting for you to do 2-hour makeup routine. You want to go. Let's go. Just whatever you're wearing's fine. The hair looks great. Let's get out of it. That's what most men want. And it's the same when you go to the gym. You see these huge guys doing incredible amounts of weight, incredible things. And I think they're doing that to impress other men. It's not women that are looking around like, yeah, that's impressive. It's normally men. And it is impressive. There's guys at my gym that are just absolutely amazing. And I think they think women are impressed by it, and some of them probably are, but mostly I think that impresses other men in the same way that a lot of these toxic body standards on women, around makeup and Botox, they're doing that at extreme level, I think, for other women, to impress other women and not for other men, because I don't think men really want that. I know I don't. I just want an easy life. I don't want any stress. And it's just it's not for me.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that flip, they're talking about the male side of things, probably, men's body dysmorphia is a massive thing. Like I said, being in the fitness industry, I see it massively. I suffered massively as a teenager from that, growing up seeing like those social media influencers, specific brands, and they're 60-year-old influencers that were absolutely jacked to the gills, or you assume they were based on the photos they were posting and things like that, and then leading into that body dysmorphia, and you go, it's a men's thing too, wholly and solely. And I know, like, you make the point on a lot of these issues, it's like, remove that it's a gender issue and just say it's an issue.
It's an issue, yeah. There are gendered natures to it, like in terms of body dysmorphia in men. Like men suffer more, almost exclusively. Well, almost all of sufferers of bigorexia and muscle dysmorphia are men. So that is a sort of gender asymmetry. That is an important part of the conversation. But as an overall discussion, body dysmorphia impacts both women and men. About 50-50. Some data says women slightly more, but really not a huge amount. But the way it impacts men is different. Like women aren't as insecure about being tall or their hairline or facial hair. Women are more insecure about like their weight and their boobs and their bum. And like men aren't really insecure about it. So it's very much about the parts of the body and this type of insecurity you have. But absolutely, I mean, there are so many, really it's impossible to achieve body standards for boys and men. I remember watching like Wolverine growing up, and you would see Hugh Jackman about his top on, and it's incredible, it's amazing. But if you actually read into what it takes to look like that, he has to train for like a year, like a huge diet training regime every day to get like that. And then 3 days before filming, he can't eat or drink water for 3 days. He goes on a water diet, so all the water under his skin goes away, and like the muscle sits the skin sits on his muscle really well. So he's dehydrated for 3 days and has been on a year-long sort of fitness regime for that 1 or 2 shot, that one scene, and that's just not achievable. And like they're literally waiting with a glass of water off shots. As soon as he's wrapped, he's like, have some water. He's like literally dying of thirst. Same for Henry Cavill. Like apparently he said he can smell water after 3 days. He's like, he can smell a glass of water. That's how thirsty he is. And it's like, that is just not healthy. It's not healthy to say this is some sort of norm for superheroes or men, and you can only achieve it by dehydrating yourself for 72 hours. Like that is just not healthy. That's just like what women went through. But I think the fact is no one's really talking about it.
Yeah, and I think also there's a huge misunderstanding probably in the movie industry as well, just how many of those men take steroids for roles like that as well. Like people just assume they're completely natural. It's like if you look at the size and then you combine that with a bit of CGI, and so you've got a combination of it's not achievable naturally anyway. It's not sustainable even for the person that's unnatural, because like you said, they're only doing it for specific scene, get in, get out, and then they're done. But then it's also tweaked after, and so like none of it is real.
Yeah, it's
achievable.
No, I mean, I remember there's someone visualized the most average man in America, just literally visualized him based on like the body metrics of all men, and he was just the most average looking guy ever. And then you Google like American man on Google Images, and it's like 80% of his images are like really muscular, tall, handsome men, like chiseled jaws. And you look at the actual scientific average man, and you look at the Google results, and you're like, holy shit, there's such a disconnect. Like this is the actual man, and this is like, and it's just, I don't know, it's disheartening. But one of the things I've noticed, and I'd be good to hear your thoughts on this, is that men and women tend to have different responses to body dysmorphia, body image, body positivity, let's call it. A lot of the women obviously are very positive about it. It's like no matter what body you have, no matter your size, no matter what, no matter you're beautiful and you're accepted, and that's good enough, which I understand. But then whenever I try to bring that language to men's body language, like this guy, it doesn't matter your size, men seem to be less receptive of it. And they're like, no, we need to encourage ourselves to be better. We need to get to the gym and hit things up. So it's not that they reject that wholesale of like you're beautiful no matter the size, but men seem to have they don't seem to accept that as much as women within the body positivity movement. And I want to know how much of that is good and how much of that's bad. So I do feel like I'm on board with that to an extent, but at the same time I'm also on board with the women-centric approach. So is that something you've noticed? Do you think men are less accepting and sympathetic to people with less than ideal bodies?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And being in that industry myself, like seeing that on a day-to-day basis, talking with guys on a day-to-day basis as well, it's definitely a thing. And I don't know, I always sit in these two sort of minds, and I'm kind of like, well, half of that I go, that's probably a good thing. Like I think like it can go too far the other way, where we kind of, I always like to separate the statement, I guess, by saying like, so you should want to like have something you're going after, you're striving, you're trying to be better and you're trying to be healthy, but that doesn't make you a bad person if you're overweight or whatever. And I think that's where like the lines have blurred. It's kind of like body positivity turned into it's healthy to be fat, which is not the case.
Yeah.
But body positivity is, I think, if we were to track it back to where it started, it probably came from a place of being like, you're not a shit person if you're overweight. That doesn't mean you're lazy at work. It doesn't mean you're unable to do other things that other people are capable of doing. It just means, but it's not healthy at the same time. Like we can't be delusional in that sense that being obese is a safe thing to do, because that's a dangerous road to then play, I think, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of my first clients is working with the NHS, diabetes and obesity, and it's amazing the level of denial from people who are fat and have diabetes. One guy was literally missing his leg from diabetes, and he was still joking about it. I'm like, what are you waiting for? Like, lose the other leg? Like, it's the biggest cause of amputation beneath the knee, biggest cause of blindness, costs the NHS about £10 billion a year, and you're laughing about it. like where like everyone's just obsessed with like talking about more funding for healthcare, more funding for NHS, etc. But I've never had anyone talk about how if we ate a little bit better and exercise a little bit more, we could save £10 billion every year, which is about 10% of the entire budget for NHS just goes to type 2 diabetes. So it's frustrating how everyone's just like, body positivity. And there is obviously a point to saying that just because you're fat or you have any sort of body type doesn't make you less valuable as a person. And that is true. But that's very different to sort of reinforcing unhealthy living styles. There's a difference between supporting and reinforcing. Supporting, yes. Reinforcing, perhaps no. And it's so difficult to draw a line. I feel that line's in different places for men and women. I feel like men are more about like changing, and women seem to be more about supporting. But I mean, I don't know. It's not really an area I know a huge amount about. But that's just what. Whenever I post about body positivity for men, people are less receptive to it and more wanting to encourage better standards rather than accepting these perceived poor standards of care. So, yeah.
No, it is. And it's interesting. I find like you talk about like kind of like social media echo chambers, I guess, as well. And by that, if these are the things you're talking about and we attract those sort of people into our conversations online, it's like we're getting such a small percentage of these people, and they all hold that sort of same opinion, or they all have the same rebuttal to your opinion. Whereas if we walked out on the street and had the same conversation with 1,000 people, or however many may be reacting to that post, then what sort of conversation are we getting in different environments? And maybe what we're finding is we're just so washed out by one group just because of that's kind of what they're constantly seeking online. But that's not actually the reality in the real world either. Like, I don't know, it could be not.
Yeah, I mean, I've always wondered why I have so many personal trainers and fitness people following me, who I love, and thank you for following me. And I reckon it's because there's a similar level of like denialism and pseudoscience within sports science and nutrition, exercise in general, and a lot of unhealthy sort of conversations going on in the same way that there's a lot of denialism of what I talk about, a lot of pseudoscience flying around my space and your space. And I wonder whether that's the reason why so many people in sports science and personal trainers follow me, because they all have a very no-nonsense sort of bucket of ice water in the face sort of approach. And I don't know, why do you think? Is there an overlap between what I do and what you do? And could that explain why I have quite a lot of support from you guys?
Yeah, I think it's probably that taking the accountability is probably a good word there that people have maybe across the board there. They like to even if some things are out of their control, it's kind of like, well, I'm going to just do the things that are in my control, regardless of maybe that's only 1 out of 100 things that I have that for. So, and with that same sort of messaging, whether there's a bit of overlap there as well.
Yeah, I mean, my mum, her PhD's in obesity, and like, as much as I'm called a misogynist and a sexist, I don't think people realise that the voice of the Tin Men is mostly the voice of my mum, because my mum is like an amazing critical thinker, very like calm and collected, very sophisticated and balanced in her points of view. Works at NHS as well, has very interesting political opinions that are very nuanced, and hearing her talk about obesity and the science and misunderstanding of science around obesity, I sort of see it very similar to what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to sort of extinguish this bullshit and replace it with like a more detailed and often difficult to read set of ideas that are actually based in evidence, not in like the wants and wishes of the people reading it. Like people, I think that's maybe what it is. Like people don't want to accept the truth of healthy eating and obesity in bodies in the same way as they don't want to accept the truth of a lot of things I say. And people would rather live in that sort of comfortable, sort of fluffy little, like, I don't know, little cave and comfort themselves rather than go outside and do the hard work.
Yeah, and I wonder whether then in like your area sort of, it'd be interesting to see of your observation, the sort of people that kind of kick back on what you're saying online about men's health, men's issues and things like that. Are they the people that the world is really, really good for right now? So they're kind of like, no, push that to the side because they don't want to see things maybe turn and them be accountable for their life a little bit more. And it's much like the weight loss sort of thing. If the more that we prove that it's calories in, calories out, and it's not, some magical pill that's going to fix you or it's your hormones as to why you can't lose weight, the more that they're going to be held accountable for that as well.
Yeah, I feel the more you've dug your flag into the ground, the harder it is to pull it back out again. And a lot of people have dug their flag bloody far into the ground in this area of advocacy. They really have. They've sort of made their entire life and identity. They identify as being a feminist, for example. They identify as the fact that the patriarchy exists. They built their job and their career and their community and their family and friendship groups around this one single idea. And when I come along and you might have put that flag in the wrong place, it's embarrassing. It's really embarrassing. It's like walking around with food in between teeth all day. Everyone's seen it. You look stupid. And getting out and you get home and it's like there's food in between your teeth the whole time. The solution is not to go back out and not to go back out the same thing. The solution is to take the food away from between your teeth. So, yeah, I feel like there is. I don't know. I think people who are looking back at today are going to be ashamed of themselves. Some of the things that have happened to men and boys under the watch of so-called gender equality advocates has been horrific and has led to like untold amounts of death. Like looking at domestic violence, for example, and how we've basically neglected and erased male victims of abuse for 50 years. That has undoubtedly caused untold amounts of deaths of women and men and children, and we continue to do it. So that is a blemish, that is an ugly black mark on our record, and some people just don't want to see it. And I quite understand why they would not want to see it, but you have to see it. Looking back, it's going to be a huge shame. And I mean, we had a big scandal in the UK recently in the post office, like a institutional sort of corruption within the post office that led to deaths. Now I'm ready for the next expose on the domestic violence industry and perhaps even the psychological industry more widely, and even the family court system and how their systemic sexism has caused deaths and caused untold immiseration of countless men and women. So, yeah, I think people want to live in denial and they don't want to look back and see what they had. I mean, I compare it a little bit to like when you're growing up, and I'm obviously a great example of this, but hair. Like growing up, you think you've got the greatest hairstyle ever. Like 20 years ago, you look back at your photos of yourself, you're like, oh, I cannot believe I had that haircut. I cannot believe I wore that velour tracksuit. I cannot believe I wore those Air Jordans that are 5-side. I cannot believe that hair. But at the time, that was the best thing ever. At the time, I thought I was absolutely right. I thought I looked great. I thought I was making the right decision every day when I went to school. But it's only looking back with enough time and distance and through a wide enough lens that I'm like, that's kind of embarrassing.
Yeah.
And
no wonder I didn't get yes asking that girl out on the date. It makes sense now.
Yeah. You cringe at the things you thought were cool when you were a kid, and looking back as an adult, I no doubt I'll probably look back at this hair now in 20 years and be like, I can't believe I did that. The solution is to update your tastes and style and ideas and haircuts, and not keep sticking to the same ideas. Let it go. Understand that we're learning all the time and things are changing all the time. You've got to update your worldview all the time. and get a different haircut.
So when obviously like then talking about these contexts of like male, and you've touched on people taking their own lives and things like this as well. Do you think a lot of these issues, so when we talk about male depression, male suicide and things like that, it's a lot of these factors that are swept under the carpet that are actually the bigger causes of men depression, loneliness, all these other factors? It's not because they're not talking enough. It's not like, because they didn't necessarily speak to someone. It was that, thinking about what actually caused them to get to that stage in the first place. It's a lot of these factors.
Yeah, I mean, male suicide is probably the main issue I talk about. There's just so much to say, so much people are getting wrong, and obviously it devastates so many people. Everyone probably knows someone that's lost a man to suicide. And as much as I hate catchphrases and the way we described it earlier, I mean, there are fewer places than male suicide that are more beleaguered by catchphrases and very narrow worldviews. Like most of all, the concept of toxic masculinity causing male suicide as some sort of blanket assertion to explain all suicides of all men. And I'm like, if you've met any families, bereaved families or friends of men who have died by suicide, the one thing is often very clear, and they have no idea why that man killed himself, no idea what he was going through. And yet people online claim to have the answer to that man's death and all men's death, and it's the same answer, and it's toxic masculinity that's doing it, and it's just absurd. So in view of that, I obviously want to say that every male suicide is different. I can't possibly give you an answer to every single male suicide. The only way we'd ever know why a man died by suicide is by sitting down and talking to him, but we can't do that anymore because they died. So that's the most important thing I will say. But in general, what I will also say is that whilst male suicide has enjoyed an increased amount of conversation in the press, and good, because it should have a long time ago, we're not talking about it in the right way. A lot of the time we're talking about men need to open up, men need to cry, men need to take better care of their mental health, as if it's a male-inflicted problem. And it sort of ignores the fact that the majority of men who are suicidal don't conceptualize the problem they have as a mental health problem. A lot of them have like a financial problem, or a child problem, or a family problem, or a relationship problem, or a domestic violence problem, or maybe they've experienced abuse, or maybe they've been bullied, or maybe they're under pressure, maybe they're in debt. I don't know, like a huge number of problems. But like, it's not good enough to say it's a mental health crisis and men need to talk to get themselves out of it, because things like 1 in 5 male suicides in the UK are caused by relationship breakdown and child custody battles. Huge amount of fathers in the UK losing their children in a corrupt family court system. I'm like, that, I don't want to justify it, but that is a totally understandable reason to end your life. Like, if you've lost your child, your relationship's broken up, you've moved out the house, you've lost everything, like that, a man turned to suicide is not mentally unwell. He's just sort of pursuing in a cold way some sort of solution-based outcome to his problem. He's not mentally unwell. He's just lost everything. So it's not right to say he's got some sort of chemical imbalance in his brain which needs to be corrected or fixed through talking or being medicated. It's not good enough to say it's a mental health problem. It's not, because it's not primarily a mental health problem. So it's a series of different problems that push men to suicide because they've got no way out. And although encouraging men to talk does help, it's not a solution. I've often compared it to like a pot of boiling water sat on the stove, and the heat's on and the water's boiling up and it's spilling over, and that's the suicidal man. Taking the lid off is the equivalent of encouraging him to talk. It allows it to breathe, it allows it to settle down, it allows it to cool off a little bit. But the heat's still on. And the lid does actually have to go back on the top. So although taking the lid off, talking, does help, doesn't turn off the heat. The heat is something else. The heat is, like I said, some sort of maybe child custody battle. So it's not good enough to say men can talk, because men are talking. Like 91% of men, middle-aged men who died by suicide, did seek help and still died by suicide. So more than 9 in 10 men who died by suicide in that study sought help and still died. Some of them sought help the week before dying. So no, we reject your lazy suggestion of men can talk, men can cry as some sort of silver bullet to male suicide, because it doesn't work, and it hasn't worked. Like, clearly, as much as we talk about male suicide, the rates are still the same. Often they're going up. So clearly it's not working. So let's try something else. Let's actually try listening to what men have got to say. How about that? That'd be nice. Not to say men can talk, and then sticking our fingers in our ears when they tell us things we don't want to hear. Like, the amount of times I'm told to shut up and I'm talking about the very things that cause male suicide. I'm like, I was told to talk. Now I'm telling you the thing that's causing male suicide. Now you're telling me to shut up. Yeah. So, as always, there's lots of accountability to go around. Lots of lessons to be learned by everyone, including women and men. And enough of these stupid catchphrases, meaningless catchphrases that don't do anything and only piss people off and divide us more.
Well, I think a lot of people as well, like it's, if you ask the amount of people that like post the, are you okay day or the talk mores and the things like this on social medias, if you actually tried to talk to that person, they'd kind of like, boom, see you later, or they'd dodge the conversation.
Yeah.
They'd, like most people, you can say and try and encourage that talking, but if you're not going to, most people won't even then listen. And like you're saying as well, like it's then if on even on a professional level, like it's, or like government, society, whatever, the higher level that has the ability to maybe make some of these changes to, maybe it's a systematic thing or whatever it may be, you actually have to do those things, not just kind of take notes and then put it back in the drawer.
Absolutely. And that it's uncomfortable. There are uncomfortable conversations to be had. I had a friend who lost someone to suicide, and he sent around the classic message to all the boys in the group saying, if anyone wants to talk, let me know. I'm here to help. We need to talk to each other, which is good. That's taking the lid off the pan. It's good. But then I remember the following week I put up some content on my page about male victims of sexual violence, especially by women. And that's when I saw him next, he pulled me aside and sort of castigated me and told me off for being tone deaf. And I'm like, do you realise that experiences of sexual assault increase the rates of suicide in men and boys 10 times? So a boy who's been sexually assaulted in childhood is 10 times more likely to attempt suicide later in life. So you talk to me about men can talk and should talk about suicide. And now here I am sharing information about one of the biggest causes of suicide that 10x increases it. And you're saying I'm tone deaf. Am I the one that's tone deaf here, or is it you? Yeah. And that's a really good microcosm of the problem, where everyone wants to talk about men can talk, but like I said, when it comes to listening to what men have got to say, we don't want to fucking hear it because it's difficult, and it exposes us to embarrassment and exposes us to the idea that maybe we don't know everything and maybe we are wrong, and we are bloody wrong. When it comes to male suicide, we are so wrong, and like I said, it's causing deaths, like 4,500 male deaths in the UK every year to suicide. And it's just the biggest risk to my life every day, and your life. Today, tomorrow, the day after that, every day until you're about 50. So that's the reality we're dealing with. That's the failure we've presided over and the devastation it causes.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. A recent podcast I did with like Dr. Tim Sharp, and he talked about, obviously, he's a psychologist. And so he had that, once again, he called it the quote unquote extreme view in the eyes of society these days, in that majority, if not almost all depression and anxiety is psychosocial factors, like we're talking about here, like the things that are happening in someone's life. It's not a biological factor. Like it's trauma, it's an event, it's like you said, financial stress, it's maybe a relationship stress, whether it doesn't even have to be like a domestic violence sort of based relationship, but maybe just an unhealthy relationship with friends, family, partner, whatever it may be. These are the things pushing someone down that way. And I think most men and people probably in general also, like talking of that, it's not just men that would feel these things, but maybe men have a different bucket of things that kind of push them this way a little bit more. Most guys would resonate with something in that sort of circle that I've just kind of talked about there, where they'll be like, oh yeah, that something in that group, whether it was work, relationship, something there has pushed me to a point where I've never been that upset maybe before. Not to the point where I necessarily even wanted to go that step further, but they felt that lump in the chest.
Yeah, I mean, you really need to understand the male experience to understand what are the issues that are causing male suicide. And a lot of it's lack of purpose. A lot of the purpose we place onto men is sort of orbits around money and being a provider. Like provider, protector, like work, and that's it. Like you're there to provide for your family. And when men lose that, they lose that sense of purpose. They feel like a burden, and that's when suicide becomes like an actual outcome that they are facing. Like the biggest at-risk group to suicide in the UK today, never discussed, is middle-aged men, often working in construction, living in sort of small rural towns in the north of England. Like I've never seen them campaign for. The whole area of men's mental health advocacy is totally taken up by a bunch of really attractive millionaire men who know very little at all about the actual men experience and have basically centered themselves. And I'm like, just shut up. Just how about you shut up and let the actual men talk who are facing this problem? And like, let's understand what male suicide is. So in the context of that construction worker, often when construction workers in these towns, they haven't got a huge amount of savings, they haven't got a huge amount of money, they've often got a family to support. They get to the age of 40 or 50, their back gives out, they can no longer work, they can no longer provide, they accumulate debt, they kill themselves. That's the brutal, like in a nutshell, story about happens again and again and again. And first of all, that no amount of talking for that man is actually going to solve his problem. It will certainly help if you went to a therapist or a men's group and said, I'm really struggling in my back, I'm really struggling. That would absolutely help. But it won't fill his bank account with money. It won't make his back better. It won't give him a new job. So just because we're talking about a problem doesn't mean we're solving it. And I am sick, like I said, sick to death of the men's mental health sector just being taken up by these narcissists, these celebrity men selling books or selling brand deals or whining on their podcasts with their man buns and millions of pounds in the bank, acting like they're any sort of spokesman for men. And they're just not. No, Justin Baldoni, you do not know what it's like to be a normal man. So stop pretending like you do and start giving this platform to people that actually are living this experience, like the man I described. And yeah, I have my own expert who has a similar thing as you, Susie Bennett, who I always shout out. She works a lot of suicidal men. She's a PhD in male suicide. And she has so much experience working firsthand with these suicidal men that are never discussed on podcasts and never discussed by so-called mental health advocates. And she says, when I hear about their problems, their life, their environment, their experiences, I'm like, I'm not surprised that you don't want to be here anymore. That sounds horrible to say, but it's also very validating. And she's like, you're not mentally unwell. You've not got some sort of brain chemistry imbalance. You're just got a fucked up life and no one's helping you. And I'm not surprised that you don't want to be anymore. And that's those men, they're not mentally unwell. They just see suicide as a rational, solution-based outcome. Yeah. And no amount of talking will ever solve that. The solution to that is societal change, which, funnily enough, this area of societal change, all our mental health advocates are totally silent, totally silent on it. They don't say anything. And it's an area of despair for me, how bad men's mental health advocates are doing right now. And yet they're getting praise heaped on their head.
Yeah, well, I think as well, like in that as well, like as some of those cases, like you said, you can't just fill a man's bank account. You can't just do these things. And it's, but you know, like I guess for some men, it's trying to maybe reach out to them in a way in proving that there are things that can get better. There are, you know, because that man that's feeling that right now, like it's all of the list of things, whatever, they feel like there's nothing. They feel like the only solution is that kind of, I'm going to end it here. That's all I can do. And so, you know, some of those factors maybe in not all cases, but some cases, maybe a different job is a potential opportunity. A different relationship is a potential opportunity. Living somewhere different is a potential. Now it's not going to solve every one of those issues because some people are bound by different restrictions, but there's a lot of cases where they could have those changes, which then changing those factors, they might be like, oh my God, wow. Yeah, I don't actually want to pursue with this extreme measure. It's something that is changeable and something that can be done.
And the change has to come from out there, from society. Like going back to, I can no longer do this job as a cause of male suicide. That's happening everywhere, not just in construction. But men are disproportionately paying the price of automation, artificial intelligence in America, especially. Like heavy industry, that's going to go. Driving, courier, haulage, that's going to go. Manufacturing, that's all going to go to automation, all be exported overseas, all be lost to AI and that sort of thing. There are not going to be any more lorry drivers in 10 years' time, because that's all going to be self-driving. So what happens to those men? No one's trying to retrain them. No one's presenting them, oh, here's a new job you could possibly do. So we're leading them down the path to suicide. And I think it's like 12 of the 14 job categories expected to grow the most in the next 10 years are dominated by women. And the other two are by men. One of them is a janitor. And I don't see any push to get men into the fields where they're underrepresented. All I hear is advocacy to bring women into the fields, the few remaining fields where they're underrepresented, a lot of it around STEM. And STEM is worth talking about because it's just bullshit, mostly bullshit. But there's another acronym which I support called HEAL. So that's healthcare, English, healthcare, education, administration, and language. And those are all areas like healthcare, for example, teaching, we've discussed, administration. These are all different areas of women are dominant, the psychological industry as well. And no one's trying to get men into there. I'm like, if we're going to help address this massive unemployment crisis that's causing men to take their lives, can we not try and get them into teaching or healthcare or nursing or psychology? Like, can we retrain these men through maybe more vocational learning? Let's actually talk about some actual solutions that we can enact as a society, rather than just constantly telling men to talk about it. I'm like, talking doesn't solve everything. We need to actually make changes. And one of those changes is, what are we going to do with this mass unemployment of men that's causing them to take their lives, turn to addiction, substance abuse, drinking, home, deaths of despair, you call them. And it's like, the issue is so much bigger than we pretend it is. Yeah.
And I guess that comes with like looking at, I mean, now some of it is a bit of an unknown as to what industries will exist and what jobs will exist and whatever, but it's kind of like, let's call it like 20 years. Can we try and at least see what the next 20 years look like to try and then move these people, men specifically, into those educational roles to be ready for that?
But I feel like it wouldn't be unreasonable to say that any job that involves driving is going to be gone, or at least hugely reduced. Any taxi driving, any lorry driving, haulage. Hang on one sec. Alexa, stop. Yeah, cut that out. Any sort of heavy industry work, that's all going to be gone. And like, maybe not entirely gone, but it's a safe bet to say it's going to require some sort of rethink. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like delivery driving, what's happening to delivery drivers? They're mostly men. Lorry drivers, they're mostly men. Like ice road truckers, they're mostly men. They're all going to go. So yeah, we need to find somewhere else for them to work.
Yeah, and I guess under this same sort of branch of conversation, it's interesting. I know, like, Jordan Peterson talks about this quite a lot in the, the patriarchy sort of thing of men's jobs, and men have in the top percentage, and men get all these CEO roles and all these other sort of roles as well. It's like, well, so a lot of those jobs we've just listed off there, that men are the majority of garbage truck drivers, working in the mines, doing all these sort of things as well. It's like, where are we missing that conversation around the jobs that no one really wants to do because they are eat shit jobs, but they're mostly men.
Like bricklayers, and like plumbers, sewage workers, like these difficult, dangerous jobs, dirty jobs that claim thousands of America, 4,500 men die every year from work. That is shocking. 4,500 men every year, and they're often doing the jobs you described, like fishing, for example. Like, you would not believe how many people die in the fishing industry every single year in the world. Do you want to guess how many? In the global fishing industry.
Here we go.
100,000.
100,000.
100,000. And it's
in
like,
one industry.
They are doing that job. They're not eating those fish themselves. Those are for us. These are jobs they do for us. Like the sewage is for us. The electricity, the food in your fridge, the water you have in your tap when you turn it on, the heating, the gas, electricity, all of that, all this building, all this internet connection is made possible by mostly men. So I don't understand why that never makes into the discussion of the patriarchy. And why are they doing that? Are they trying to do that to oppress and monitor us and control? No, they're doing it because that's their job, and they find it rewarding, and they want to help society like anyone else does. Let's just calm down with this ridiculous sort of supervillain cartoon you're playing, like the patriarchy. And let's understand that men are just individuals, and they're not trying to oppress you. They're just doing their job. And you're right that we never compare the dirty, dangerous jobs that cause so many men to die in terms of men and women. And neither do we compare men's failure. Like, I'm an entrepreneur. I've set up businesses for like almost 15 years now, and they all failed. Like, all but one of them failed. And like, I've been that guy living at his parents' house, sleeping as a 20-something-year-old man at home, no salary, no nothing, trying to get your own business off the ground. I never made it into one of his graphs that was like 99% of CEOs. I mean, like, it's because men take that risk and it doesn't pay off. It didn't pay off me like very often. And no one ever compares the out of work CEO living at home with his parents, struggling to get by, hustling 12 hours, 18 hours a day, getting paid virtually nothing. No one ever compares them, because they are also representative of men as well. And it's only the good things, the success and the good things that women and feminism want, but never the bad. Often they want rights but not responsibility, too often. And those are two sides of the same coin, I'm afraid. So yeah, I wish there were more graphs showing the amount of destitute, out of work, broken, failed CEOs who are men versus women, because that will also be part of the conversation. And that's a much bigger segment
really
of than successful CEOs.
Yeah, like if you could see like what percentage, like, so for every failed business, what percentage was a man versus a female as well, like those sort of things.
Yeah,
But it's funny, like
which
as you're listing off like the person grinding away, doing all these things, living at home, doing all this sort of stuff, like I'm like sitting there
yeah,
smiling. I'm like, because that's me right now. Like it's literally like
yeah,
you've just explained me, and it's just funny. Like,
yeah. Well,
and then
what
I'll
about,
put you a statistic later.
go on.
Like you'll become like if you're
Oh,
successful,
right,
you
yeah,
become a
yeah,
statistic. But when you're not
yeah.
successful, they forget about you.
Yeah, no one's comparing the statistics of like CEOs who are sleeping under their desk at work because they can't go
Mm,
home and they haven't got time to go home, or maybe they don't have maybe they're sleeping in their car. Where the fuck is the pie chart for them? Because that is mostly
yeah.
men. Like we all talk about how men are more likely to partake in risk-taking behaviour, which is true, and also one of the reasons why so many of them die at work. It's because they're happy to take risks. Part of that's biology, part of that's societal. Let's move on from that question. But no one ever looks
Mm,
at the fact that men take greater risks as a means of understanding why are there so many more male CEOs than female CEOs, and why are there also more homeless men than homeless women, and like why there no representation of men and women at top and bottom of society. Maybe part of that's due to men taking more risks. Maybe men are happy to take risks. Maybe they're going to roll the dice and becoming a CEO, and they'll end up, destitute, sleeping under their desk like I did.
yeah.
And that's just part of men's behaviour. They'll end up at the top and bottom because they've won or lost the metaphorical lottery of life. And no, I never hear that discussed. I think that's an important point. I don't think that explains the entire disparity, but that's certainly an important point of view. Like, does male risk-taking behaviour lead to the overrepresentation of men at the bottom and top and bottom of society?
Yeah, I guess it comes under the same sort of bracket of like when you've got like 100 engineers going for a job, and of which 5 are female, 95 are male, and you know, we have to have the equal amount of male and female going through, and it's like, well, that's actually not equality in itself, or like just justice, I guess you could call it as well. It's the same sort of conversation. It's like you can't be comparing how many men are CEOs versus how many women, and forget about how many tried versus male and female. The same as how many tried for that job versus how many got it. You have to kind of look at both sides of the coin.
And it shows like a breathtaking ignorance, the hard work of being a CEO or entrepreneur, like how long hours and pressure and responsibility you have to deal with, like living off nothing, paying yourself virtually nothing, working all hours a day, 24 hours a day in many ways, because you're always switched on. Never hear that discussed. And people talk about CEOs as if they just inherited that money. They just found it lying on the floor one day, and they're just forever walking around counting their money and stocks and shares. Like, it's fucking hard, and often it leads to failure. So let's have a realistic conversation. Stop pretending like being a CEO is great. And it comes at the sacrifices. That CEO who may well be a millionaire, he might spend his entire life becoming a millionaire, go home to an empty house or a family that doesn't know who he is. So it's not all good. He has privileges and disadvantages, and depending on where he might have privileges at work, he might be disadvantaged at home, he might be being abused at home, maybe his children hate him. Like, he's a rich and interesting individual person. He's not just some sort of cartoon CEO. Like, he's a human being, and it's not all good for everyone all the time.
Yeah, which is something we just talked about, those factors that you said, maybe he goes home on his own, kids hate him, partner hates him, or something like that. All factors which are massively leading to issues in men's mental health as well. So like over glamification of these sort of roles and things like that as well, without the nuance of it as well. Like, there's a big missing chunk of the pie.
And this is something I can definitely talk about from a personal point of view. Is that my dad, he was never a CEO, but he was a highly successful psychologist, one of the world's most influential psychologists. Traveled the world. He's written about textbooks on the news, on the radio, everywhere when he was alive. He did incredible things. Had such a huge like amount of citations for research. But I tell you, although he was hugely successful and a self-made man, when he came home, he was not. He was different, very different. Like, he didn't have a connection with me and my sister or my mum. He was a bit of a stranger in his own house. He didn't have the same amount of friendship groups as my mum did. All the friends my mum made when she was raising us and taking me and my sister to school and nursery, that she made in sort of playgrounds and after school, they still exist. And she now she's retired. She has a huge network of girlfriends and a great connection with me and my sister, and a more sense of belonging and a stronger network, because she was able to do that whilst my dad, when he was alive, none of that. Like, he was extremely lonely, isolated and depressed, I imagine, as a result of spending his entire life sacrificing for his family, in the same way that my mum also sacrificed for her family. My sister never seems. She's always like, George, you never understand what mum sacrificed for us. And I'm like, probably not, but I think I do have a good idea. But I don't think you have any idea what dad sacrificed. And I feel like men pay the price of that sacrifice after retirement when their job is essentially over or drastically reduced, and they're confronted with the reality that maybe they don't have as many friends as their wife or the mother of their children.
Yeah,
So,
loneliness is, becoming a even bigger issue, especially when you add in the work from home and all these other factors as well, where, sure, you could argue we have lots of connections, but we lack proper connection. Like it's, we can access so many people, but we don't have a deep connection with many people, which is what causes loneliness.
Yeah, well, and obviously loneliness is probably the biggest associated factor to male suicide. So that is one of the sort of universal causes or associated factors of suicide, and it's awful. And it's not even loneliness is not and loneliness by just being in the same room as someone else. Solving loneliness is more than that. Loneliness is solved by like actually having a meaningful, deep, human, authentic connection with someone, rather than being in the physical space of them. And I always talk about this. I talked about this a little bit with Chris and Modern Wisdom about how the antidote to male suicide for so many men is fighting loneliness, to find a sense of connection, often with other men. That is the solution for so many male suicide to be solved if we could help men build those relationships. But then also that same antidote, that same push for connectedness of men in male spaces is also vilified. A lot of people hate the idea of men spending time together. A lot of people hate the idea of male spaces, men's groups, men's networks. Like I'm trying to set up a men's network at a large university right now in the UK, and it is a shit show, a complete shit show. But like, you realise your male students are twice at risk of suicide as your female students, and one of the biggest causes of male suicide is loneliness. And these students are going through extremely difficult time in their life, highly pressured, and there is no male network at university. Every LGBT, black, women, disabled, all of them have networks, quite right. None for the men, and like, they are the most at risk to suicide. And not only are you not doing it, but the mention of doing it is causing so much hostility that you cancelled it or are thinking about cancelling it. So the hostility towards male spaces, men talking, men's groups, that is one of the things I think we're going to be most disappointed in, and how it actually enabled and increased male suicide as a result of our cowardice and as a result of our mischaracterization and misunderstanding of men's groups. We seem to think there's some sort of patriarchy HQ where men just get together, discuss how we want to oppress women. And it's like, honestly, get over yourself. Like, you're not like, no, that's not what we're talking about. Don't flatter yourself. We're just talking about our lives. We're not talking about women at all. And if we are, in a good way,
pipe down a little bit. Like,
shut the fuck up. How about that piece of advice? Like, stop pretending like everything's about you. Get over yourself and recognise men's lives are not just about oppressing women. Like, they're not about that at all. You
got better
don't get
things
to go
to do.
through. Yeah, fuck off. Like, there's so many things that men are desperate to talk about. Zero of them are oppressing women. I've been to these men's groups, and every single time I go to them, they are so wholesome. I always try and go as a neutral observer, just because I'm going as the TinMen. I want to see what it's like. I always get sucked in. I'm always like, all right, let me tell you what mine are. And I've never heard anything bad said about women. It's been so respectful, and it pisses me off when many people deliberately misunderstand their spaces as a means of vilifying them, and the devastation that causes to men, where we're basically depriving them of the antidote to suicide, which is connection between other men. So no more shaming of men's groups.
Yeah, and I'm speaking from personal experience as well. Like for various reasons, like I always like to give this example as a 24-year-old man. Like, it's so people feel like they're heard and felt as well. And in that, like, not that long ago, for like a few years, I went through a period where I didn't really get to see many of my friends for various reasons or whatever. And you go like, this is one of the hardest parts of my life. Like, and now that my life is very similar, but I'm back being able to see my friends, I'm like, oh my God, my life is fucking amazing. Like, it's the stress at work, the stress of business. You can kind of get through these things a lot easier because you know that, hey, you know what? But tomorrow night I get to spend a couple of hours with the boys, and that's the best fucking time of my life. Like, nothing can replace that. And so, like, it just shows the polar opposites of life when you've got that.
Well, that's taking the lid off the pan, isn't it? Like we talked about it. Like, you've still got the same stress, the same heat is boiling the same water, but seeing your mates talking about it's taking the lid off the pan, even if just for an evening. But unfortunately, the lid has to go back on. But it's still, like I said, it's a reminder of the importance of men talking. Because I'm not saying it's not important; it is. It's just not a complete solution. So I'm glad you're doing that. And I mean, I feel the same. And yeah, I mean, I think going to the gym is important for that. I mean, I go to the gym with a friend, and it's more of a place to chat and hang out and just have a bit of routine. Like I'm not there, pushing like massive weights. I'm just there to chat, which is fine as well.
Yeah, and I think also like it's that like when you're with your mates, it doesn't mean it's like, all right, let's sit down and let's talk about our problems. You don't have to do that. You can just chat shit and have a good time. Like it's time with friends doesn't have to be therapy either. Like it might feel you might feel like it at the end. You might walk away and be like, oh, that feels amazing, but that's just because you've spent time with a person you have a good connection with as well.
And it's it's a good opportunity to talk a little bit about how usually men and women's spaces should be set up differently for this sharing. Like a lot of women I'm always speaking generalizations, but generally speaking, women like to have face-to-face time, like we're doing, but in person, start facing each other, chatting about our feelings, opening up. That's what most therapy approaches are based on, going into clinical space, talking to another woman about your problems. That is effective on a lot of women, less effective on men, in my opinion. Men prefer to be in groups. Men prefer to be doing physical activities, like even stuff like driving, like not even facing each other. Like driving's great because you're facing away, you're facing forwards. You can chat. You're a bit distracted with some sort of physical activity. I promise you, if you sat your friend down like this and face to face, ask him to tell about his problems, you'll probably get very little. But if you got in a car, went for a drive, you'll probably open up way more. Or went to play golf, or went for a walk, took the dogs out, maybe did some cooking, like some sort of physical activity, and especially in groups. That's more towards how men like to share. Some women prefer that as well, but generally it's more men in my experience. So we need to also change the way we set up these sharing spaces and understand men don't function like women. Understand that in the same way that like businesses in America are dominated by men, like 80% of board directors in America are men. Naturally, they're going to create work environments that benefit to other men. In the same way that clinical psychologists, 85% of clinical psychologists are women. Naturally, they're going to do the same for women. So they're going to create intervention models and approaches and frameworks that are more beneficial to women, not intentionally, not as like some sort of malicious act, but that's because they're women, and that's how they think. And I don't know how women think. I can try my best, but we need to understand that a system where 85% of people working are women are probably going to create systems that are beneficial to women. That's just a mundane, that's not even a controversial thing to say. But we've already accepted that for men. Now it's time to look at it for women. And does that mean psychological intervention, psychological groups, treatment, suicide prevention is more set up for women's needs than men's? That's a good question.
Which I guess that circles us back to the education system then as well. If 80% of primary school teachers are female, then is the system dedicated towards more female based? Like you said, like young boys, maybe they want to get outside and do more, physical learning and stuff, like incorporating the learning into some form of activity. Whereas maybe the young woman is more preferred to sitting behind a desk and having that face to face with a teacher as well.
Yeah. So absolutely right. That is a great hypothesis and one that has substantiated by a lot of evidence. That boys generally, I was one of these boys at school. I just wanted to run around and be like, and the idea of quiet reading time for me is horrific. I still don't like reading books now. Like I listen to audiobooks. For me to sit down and read a book, I want to launch it across the room or out the window.
Yeah.
So I want to be moving. And school is more set up for girls, typically, not for people like me. And so kinespatial learning is more beneficial to boys, like physical activities, sort of like books and plays and sort of activity cards and just physical activities are more beneficial. And also, like, you're right that in the same way that 85% of clinical psychologists are women, about 80% of teachers are women as well. And they also just grade girls higher. Like girls get higher grades for the same work than boys. And boys are punished more harshly for the same behaviour as girls. So there's a teacher bias there as well. Not only is the learning styles biased against boys, generally speaking, but generally speaking, again, they are marked down for the same work as girls. And it's so interesting because not only is there evidence of this in terms of empirical studies, but there's also real life examples where in the UK, boys are behind girls in education, have been for 40 years, coming up to 40 years now. It all started when we went from O-levels to GCSEs, which is the two different sort of qualifications. We went from O-levels, I think, in 1986 to GCSEs. And what changed what created that gap was the fact that we introduced teacher assessments and coursework. So O-levels are based entirely on exams, so objective measure of intelligence. Boys and girls are doing more or less the same every single year. Suddenly, GCSEs arrive, incorporating teacher assessments, which are more subjective, and that's when the gap begins. So the gap hasn't been there forever. The gap started when we changed O-levels to GCSEs.
Interesting.
The same again. We saw the same phenomenon again in lockdown. Obviously, exams all cancelled because of COVID lockdown. All grades based in the UK were based on teacher assessments and coursework again, no exams. So we've got another great example where although both boys and girls' grades went up under teacher assessments, girls went up even more. So the bonus of teacher assessments was felt more by girls. And you see it, you see the grades, just suddenly go boing, and the girls goes up, the boys goes up, the girls goes up even more. And it just suggests systemic bias against boys, systemic bias. And those are not words of mine. I'm directly quoting a hero of mine, Mary Kernick Cook, who was the CEO of UCAS. So UCAS basically are the authority on all higher education in the UK. They basically control who goes to university and who doesn't. She was the CEO, and she's saying this looks like systemic bias against boys. So don't take my word for it, take hers. So yeah, there's strong arguments that there is systemic bias in the education system and the psychological industry against boys and men. For the same reason as it was against women in various areas of work in America, especially.
Yeah, this is interesting. I know you talk about kind of that shift in time where the patriarchy, I guess, kind of started to maybe quote unquote backfire on men, or not backfire, like I guess the shift in the rise of the push towards boosting female education and all these other factors as well, and how that shifted a long time ago, yet we still kind of roll with the same model of what we're trying to fix, and increase female performance, increase this, and not really looking at the fact that male education is declining in comparison. And I guess, like that once again, that blanket term patriarchy, I must say, until I started to absorb like any form of American media as a teenager, I had no idea what that word was, no idea what it means. I feel like most people don't. They just kind of use the word because they go, oh, that's men trying to control us and oppress us. And it's like, well, look what's happening now. Like I don't think men are trying to oppress you.
It's always funny when people like Taylor Swift use it. Like Taylor Swift, one of the most powerful young women in the world, more like a literal billionaire. She's talking about patriarchy. I'm like, Taylor, you have like multiple private jets. You live in like a huge mansion. You're literally a billionaire. Just tone it down a little bit. Tone it down. The same with Jamila Jamil. Someone sent me a post of her yesterday. She was basically talking about how terrified she is to walk around and night out. Apparently, when she's walking at night, she has one hand with keys in between her fist and the other hand on a can of mace. And when she gets home, she doesn't turn the lights on because she's too scared. And when she opens the door to the front house, she's scared someone's going to be inside. I'm like, Jamila, you live in a multi-million-dollar mansion in Hollywood. You probably have some sort of private security. You definitely have some sort of private security system. You probably live in the nicest neighborhood in all of potentially the world. The crime rate there is going to be very low. Like what you're describing, in my opinion, is paranoia, some sort of mental illness. If you're walking around your Hollywood multi-million-dollar mansion with the lights off because you're afraid of men, there's something more going on there. And I'm just like,
delusion.
you stop centering the conversation of violent crime on multi-millionaire, highly privileged, normally women, as if they are the most at-risk group, because they are not. The most at-risk group to violent crime, young black boys living in the city, often from working class backgrounds, not multi-millionaire women like Jamila Jamil, not her, black boys, like I live in Lewisham. The knife crime around here is horrendous. I live in a nice part of Lewisham. There's some parts of Lewisham that are generally quite dangerous to go to, and Jamila Jamil is not there. That's where violent crime is a legitimate risk, and it is a legitimate risk to young inner city black boys, often from fatherless homes in gangs. So let's stop centering a conversation of violent crime on paranoid multi-millionaire celebrity women like Jamila Jamil. Please,
which again,
that'd be great.
and then
Taylor Swift as well. Jesus Christ.
I mean, stood up on stage and screamed "fuck the patriarchy." I'm like,
well,
built the bloody thing.
Taylor Swift had homeless men and women moved out of Edinburgh when they came to town. So Taylor Swift and her army of fans came to Edinburgh, and they were turfing out homeless men and women because they didn't want to be seen. And I was like, "You are the patriarchy. That is the patriarchy. You are the patriarchy now, Taylor. So just settle down. Settle down.
I think it's time for a new word.
Yeah, maybe it's time for some personal responsibility. Let's put it
yeah. And it's interesting, the people that have
yeah.
these conversations, I guess, around like you've brought up then like it's, young black men are at more risk of knife crime and violence and all these sort of things as well. And then they're obviously going to turn around and be like, yeah, what, from other men still? And it's like, well, that doesn't just deter the point, the fact that young men are being affected either.
There's so many levels of stupidity going on in that. And yeah, I hear that all the time. Like, it's the same bigoted, racist rhetoric. People said to say, oh, it's black and black crime, therefore it doesn't matter. Like, it's usually not just men, but black men doing it, young black men stabbing each other. That's normally who it is. And like, we've come to understand that the concept of black and black crime is a racist, bigoted term used by idiots and morons. And by the men is really no different to that, equally moronic, equally bigoted. And so what? So what? Does that mean the crime hurts any less? Oh, pardon me.
Yeah.
I didn't realise it was a man that's stabbing me. Therefore, it doesn't hurt. Oh, okay, great. And I just don't understand. Like, if we're going to say a woman's outfit doesn't justify sexual harassment against her, which it does not, then neither should a man's gender validate assault against him. Like, are you like serious? I don't understand what that's the point. Like, people that following a crime are more interested in pointing out the genitals of the assailant than actually showing compassion to the man experiencing that crime, have no place in this conversation and have proven themselves too immature to be part of this discussion, in my opinion. Like, it's not about pointing out the genitals of the assailant, or maybe it is, but it's also about showing compassion to the person being assaulted. I would say that's the most important thing. And it doesn't make any effort to understand what causes violent crime. Violent crime is mostly by men, but there are so many more views you could take of violent crime that would actually make productive understanding of who's at risk, why they're at risk, what causes it, rather than it's men doing it. Like, what does that even mean? What do you want me to do about that? Like, stop being a man? Or like, what does that actually mean? Like, if I see an assault on the street, I like to think I'd probably do something. But other than that, what am I actually supposed to do? Like, I don't have some sort of additional power because I share the same genitals of the person committing it. What does it actually mean? So it's bigoted. It's the same as like racist black and black crime. It doesn't actually show any compassion to the victim. It's victim blaming essentially, and it just makes you look very stupid when people say that, in my opinion. So let's not say that.
Yeah. And I wonder as well, like in some context there, like if we see that the common theme in different societal groups, whether it be a religious group or what genitals you have or whatever it may be, like we can start to you could look at some things more specific to that area where they're living or specific to those beliefs or whatever it may be. And that might give a better idea of what can be done about it, but it doesn't have to be a label that gets thrown on everyone that's within that realm as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can use that as an example with women. Like, FGM is one of the worst things that can be done to anyone. So female genital mutilation, horrendous crime, horrible, rightly illegal in pretty much the entire world, more or less now. But FGM still happens, and FGM is mostly performed by women. So what? Is that by the women now? And therefore FGM is no longer an issue we should care about? Obviously not. Obviously it's just as important. And again, just because it's women doing it to girls or women doing it to the women, that doesn't really mean that much. It's certainly not more important than showing compassion. And I don't understand. There's loads of things like that. Like, lesbian relationships have notoriously high rates of violence. Often the most violent relationships are gay women, same-sex relationships. No one's saying by the women, it's women doing it to the women. Like, we don't even consider that because it's a bigoted thing to say and stupid. So let's extend that to by the men and realise it's not some sort of progressive advocacy. It's just you like lifting up a flag of your own stupidity. And we are grateful for you doing that so we can see who you are. It doesn't really help the conversation. Yeah. Okay, well, thanks for your contribution. Goodbye.
Yeah, see you later. Catch you.
Yeah, and it's like there's more. Go on.
Yeah, you go.
No, I was going to say, like I said, there's more to FGM than saying by the women. It's a hugely complicated cultural, religious crime, and just reducing it to by the women is a massive disservice to FGM and women, and we deserves a much higher resolution discussion in the same way that by the men demand it's not good enough conversation of violent crime.
Yeah, people need to peel back the layers a little bit more and dig a little bit deeper as to like what is actually going on here rather than just being like, oh, that's what I can visually see straight away. So that's what it is.
or like what shaped violence, like what creates a violent man. Like no one, I don't think anyone or very few people are born violent, but people become violent through their socialization, the way they're raised, or these poor bad experiences they've had. A lot of it around bullying, especially in school. A lot of it child abuse. A lot of it neglect. And I'm like, can we stop seeing just violent men as some sort of static endpoint, and actually see it as the product of a long journey that man's been on, often as a victim in his own right. And as if you really want to stop male violence, we need to address that journey a lot earlier on to stop men following him down that path. So a lot of it, like I said, bullying isn't taken seriously enough, but bullying is a massive problem that often shapes violent behaviour and fantasies later in life. So again, like we're just constantly pointing at the end product, the violent man, but no one ever looks at how does he become violent. Like looking at it in the context of abnormal behaviour, which violence is, the basis of clinical psychology is the statement that there is no such thing as abnormal behaviour. There's only a normal response to an abnormal set of experiences. So a child who has an abnormal set of experiences, him becoming, violent or having social problems later in life is actually a very normal response to an abnormal set of experiences. I feel that's a worldview that a lot of people benefit from, especially in the context of violent men.
Yeah, which I guess, we're not trying to make an excuse for someone's actions either, but it's trying to be like, all right, well, then moving forward, what are the things that we can actually start to do to maybe eliminate a lot of these behaviors from occurring in other people time and time again as well?
Well, I mean, absolutely. I have to say that no justification of violence whatsoever. Violence is never justified unless in self-defense. But we can understand things about justifying them. People write extensively about where the Nazi Party came from, what shaped that behaviour, but none of those people are justifying what Nazis did. So in the same way, we need to talk about why men do horrible things sometimes in a way that understands but does not justify. Because there are difficult conversations to be had, like going back to school shooters. A lot of those boys come from fatherless homes. A lot of them have serious mental health problems, or were bullied. That's the context we need to be looking at. But people like Jackson Katz just are obsessed with the genitals again, like the fact that they're boys and men, and the fact that they're boys and men is more important to him than the fact that they are often victims of abuse, bullying, fatherlessness, and we need to talk about all of those as grown-ups without justifying any of them as a means of understanding why so many boys and young men end up on this road to violence, so we can stop other people joining them, not to justify, to understand, so we can lead them elsewhere, so we can intervene earlier rather than just becoming embroiled in sort of social media blaming the nebulous concept of men as if that, I don't know what that means either.
No. Interesting. Now, down the path of kind of like things being done to men as well. Like I think I recently saw on your Instagram, you talked about how like women can't commit rape or something in the UK as well. Or maybe it was in your episode with Chris. You may have touched on that a little bit as well. And I was absolutely blown away by this. In the fact that it can't occur on one side.
Hats off to Chris for giving me a platform to say that. That is one of the most controversial things I talk about. Like one of the strategic things I'm doing is I'm working out which of these issues are more palatable and which of them are more controversial. So male suicide, and more so now boys in education, those are the issues that general public are willing to talk about. That's the thin end of the wedge that people are like, okay, let's talk about these things, that's not too controversial. Male victims of rape is right down the other side of that wedge. That is like a conversation we are so not ready to have, especially rape by women. Because there's a huge systemic bias against men in that area, where in the UK, where I live, it is legally impossible for a woman to commit rape, and also academically impossible for a woman to commit rape. So it doesn't matter what a woman does, doesn't matter if she uses drugs, a weapon, anything, like whilst you're asleep, nothing. None of that will be rape. I have a friend who's been raped twice by a woman when she was sleeping and or drunk. But that isn't actually rape, because legally, the assailant has to have a penis to commit rape. And if you don't have a penis, you can't commit rape by law at all. So that means the women that did that to him are not rapists and will not be found guilty of rape and cannot be found guilty of rape. That is a massive disservice to victims of sexual violence. And it's also infantilizing of women and offensive to women, but mostly, obviously, a lot more devastating to men. I know so many men I speak to that are just completely erased by those laws and studies. Totally, they're considered victims of. They are made to penetrate or forced to penetrate. That's why they're not rape victims. They are forced to penetrate, which is just a very contrived definition. And it's not only the legal system that is letting men down, but academia is probably a bigger one. Often you'll see data saying like 99% of rapists are men, which is true. Only because of the reason I gave, because women can't. Like, how can a woman perpetrate a law that requires them to have a penis? Like saying 99% of rapists are men is like saying 99% of people that get kicks in the balls are men. Like, yeah, obviously
Makes sense.
So, but obviously, like the only way. Well, to add a little caveat, obviously, I'm saying 99% of rapists are men, which means that 1% of women are rapists, which means that women can be found guilty of rape, and they can, but only as a joint enterprise. So only if a woman helps another man commit rape is she considered a rapist. So that is the only way. But nothing she does directly will make her a rapist. It's only like a joint enterprise. But yeah. The bullet points that in the UK, women cannot legally commit rape. And it's the same in a lot of countries like India. Same rules apply.
Interesting. Do you know, so like in other Western countries, do they have different rulings? The US, Australia, you know, are they different?
Well, Australia, I'm not sure about, if I'm honest. So I won't comment. America changed it. America had the same highly gendered definition of rape, not the same wording, but essentially you have to have a penis to commit rape. And they changed it, 10 years ago? The FBI changed it because they realized 40% of rapes were not being captured by FBI data.
Wow.
And they were the rapes that were excluded. So suddenly, male victims of rape 1 year went from like maybe 5% to 38%. And that's because they were always there. It wasn't like that was suddenly a bad year. It's that the definition of rape had changed to finally acknowledge men that are raped by women. So that increase shows how big of a problem it actually is. And in the UK, there is still no data on men that are raped or made to penetrate by women. And we just simply don't know. Like Siobhan Weir is the only one that's really looking into it. In terms of government data, we don't know. We really don't know. In America, I think it's about 1 in 12 men are made to penetrate in their lifetime, which is a lot. Not as high as women, but still a significant number. And the fact that we can erase them through gendered laws, gendered frameworks is a massive affront to gender equality. And it's not equality in any way. And a lot of these are coming from feminist academics like Mary Koss, huge influential feminist researcher in America. She's on record saying it's inappropriate to consider a man a victim of rape by a woman. Inappropriate. And she is like one of the most influential so-called sexual violence experts advising the CDC on these definitions. So you have bigoted people like Mary Koss. She's very, very influential in the CDC, and the CDC just happened to have had a gender definition of rape. And I don't know if that's a coincidence, but it's certainly suspicious that a feminist researcher like Mary Koss can advocate for something so harmful and so antithetical to her own claimed beliefs of gender equality. Nothing equal about her opinions of sexual violence.
Yeah, it's pretty saddening, really. And I think, like, I know personally, as someone that knows someone very closely that has gone through that, you know the effects that it has on someone, and those effects are not based on whether they're male or female as well. Now, in my context, I do know some on the flip, but you know, you kind of go, I just can't seem to imagine that, you know, it really matters who did it. It's going to fuck someone up. And like we've said, what it then does to, you know, anyone in general, but then when we talk more specifically about men, and obviously how we've the link to depression when you've gone through a sexual assault or something like that as a man, and what the effects that you know, the increased rates of suicide and everything that comes off the back of it, you start to go, why do we have to try and have this as it's not an issue for you, it's only an issue for us? It's like it's an issue for everyone, and it's just it blows my mind if that someone could even have that opinion, which I know would be a very small minority of people that have that opinion. I'm sure if we walked on the street, most people would agree that it's absolutely horrific, no matter who it happens to.
Yeah, most people, I think every single person I've told that to has responded in the way you responded. When I say it's legally possible for a woman to commit rape in the UK by law, they're like, what? And when I explain to them, they're shocked. They're shocked and appalled. They didn't know, and they want to change it. Like, they've actually done polls now about changing the Sexual Offences Act in the UK, and overwhelmingly, British public overwhelmingly in support of making it gender neutral, just saying rape is just unconsensual sex, like having sex with someone who doesn't want to have sex. That's what rape is.
Yeah.
Doesn't really matter too much about what goes where. Like anyone can be raped, and even if men are just 1%, even if they are just 1% of victims, which they're not, it's a lot closer to like I said, 38%. They still deserve to be protected. Are we saying that if a minority gets to a certain amount, they can just be erased from legislation? Is that what we're saying? Like
Put
one
that
in
other
10,
context.
yeah, or like homelessness. 9 in 10 homeless people die are men, meaning only 10% of homeless deaths are women, which is a smaller wedge of the pie than male victims of rape. Are we gonna just get rid of them, erase them? They don't matter. Like let's just write them out of legal provision, shall we? No, obviously not. The same is true, perhaps even worse, in domestic violence, where the Duluth model is the equivalent, where it's a framework of intervening within domestic violence. It's a way in which police operate, it's a way in which refuges operate, it's a way in which funding is given out. The Duluth model totally erases male victims, paints all perpetrators as men and all victims as women. That's how it works. The most influential framework of domestic violence in the world. That's another feminist framework given to us by Ellen Pence. It's bullshit. It erases, like, the fact is 1 in 3 victims is a man, and like that's such a large number of people. That's millions of men in the UK. In Australia, it's even worse. The conversation you're not having around male victims of abuse is another huge betrayal. It's horrific what's been said about men in Australia, but it's happening here too. And the fact is, we've erased and betrayed 1 in 3 victims of domestic violence because of these gendered models that we're too cowardly to confront and get rid of. There was no plan to change the Sexual Violence Act to recognise male victims of female perpetrated rape. And there were no plans to change the Duluth model to recognise male victims of women. And in fact, the Duluth model has just been put back into the new domestic violence bill that's being written right now. So, yeah, that is what I mean. Like, no amount of male tears or male talk are going to solve those problems. I'm not sure any amount of talking is going to change that legislation. That change comes from political will and from politicians talking and listening to conversations like this. And like I said, not good enough to say talk, because the men who are being raped and excluded from care, or abused and excluded from care, like, they're not in control of that. They are a victim in their own right. So yeah, I mean.
So is that so? Men like domestic violence against men is also something that can't be charged against. Is it in some cases? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So going into the Duluth model, I think it's about 50 years old as well. So really it's outdated, but we stick to it. It's a big wheel. It's like a big diagram, like a wheel, and it has different ways in which men abuse women, and all the language is gendered. So it's like, what does he do to her? How does she feel about him? What is he doing? Is he being violent? Is he being this? Is he controlling her? Is she afraid? It's all completely, and then that's not just the wording, it's like the nature of the way it's used is to see men as perpetrators and women as victims, and that's it. So the only way they engage men are perpetrator programs. The only way they engage women are as victims. And it's like, again, it's a very low resolution view. And of course there are male perpetrators, and of course there are female victims. But guess what? They are the opposite too. There are male victims and female perpetrators. And they're being ignored. There's a reason why only about less than 5% of domestic abuse refuge goes to men. There's a reason why so little funding goes to charities that support men. There's a reason why academics who do research into male victims of abuse get death threats and bomb threats and have to end everything. There's a large campaign group, a feminist group, that lobby against these changes because they want to preserve things like the Duluth model, and they want to keep the funding for women only. They don't want any funding to go to men. And yeah, it's kind of my tin hat conspiracy phase, but it's like, I'm looking forward to how in 10 years we look back at this phase, and if we can look a little bit more scrutiny at the way in which we view and fund domestic violence programs and support victims.
Yeah,
because it's entirely gendered.
Yeah. And I think this overall sort of general, I guess, statement given our conversation here is that none of these issues are mutually exclusive. Just because you're saying that, men being victims and we need to do more about men being victims, that doesn't mean we have to ignore females and women being victims either. They can happen at the exact same time. We can care about both, and we can do what we need for both and for all victims, which seems to be like we have a conversation like this and someone will always be like, oh, but women worse, or but this, and it's like, that's not the argument. The argument is just we need to just do more here. That doesn't mean we have to take away from somewhere else either.
Well, I'll go further and say, not only is it not taken away from women, but it actually helps women. Like, talking about violent women helps women too, because women are also in relationships with other women. If you're not looking at violent women, you're also not looking at women who are victims of violent women. And you're neglecting the cyclical nature of domestic violence, where it doesn't start off with that punching. It starts off with like arguing, and then it escalates. And then, arguing becomes shouting, and shouting becomes shoving, and shoving becomes hitting. And by not looking at one half of that relationship being the woman, you're just allowing that cycle to go round and round and round, and you're leaving her open to retaliation by the man. If she's being violent to the man and you're not doing anything about it, he's eventually going to snap back, or vice versa. So talking about violent women helps women too, but still not enough to sort out the mess we're in. Like in the UK, we've had a lot of reform in our domestic violence legislation. We just had a new policy strategy come out for women. It was called something like supporting victims of violence against women. For women, that's what it's called. Supporting victims of violence against women. When the same document came out for men, although it was not even a policy strategy, it was just a document. It came out of this wording. Literally, you won't believe what it said. It said, supporting male victims of crimes considered violence against women. So a man being abused is considered a victim of violence against women.
Makes sense.
So he's a victim of violence by women, but now he's been classified as a victim of violence against women. It's just like that. That's what that document. I was like,
whoever wrote that must be like, who sits there and goes, that makes sense.
It captures the problem perfectly. It's a gift, if anything. It's a gift to people like me, because it highlights how absurd our view of domestic violence is, where we are so head over heels in love with this gendered narrative that even a man who's a victim of violence by a woman is actually a victim of violence against women. He's a woman, basically. And again, using homelessness, for example, we would never say women that are homeless men. We would never say that. Or victims of women that are victims of male suicide. Like, what sort of backward dogmatic somersault mental gymnastics have you performed to come up with that dog shit? that document is perfect for me. That's just, it summarizes everything, and how much. Imagine being a male victim of abuse as well. In the seriously, imagine being a man who's being abused. You go get help, and you're seen as a woman, a victim of violence against women. How invalidating and humiliating is that? It basically says that she's the victim somehow, and you're another perpetrator.
Yeah, and it feels like you're not taken seriously then in the matter that's at hand,
erased.
which is massively affecting your life.
Erased. And it's, don't worry, I'll go to a shelter. Guess what? There are no shelters for you. I'll go to a support program. There's none of those either. No support line, no shelter, no nothing. And you're a man, you can't be a victim. So yeah,
all this conversation about men, masculinity, all these sort of things as well. And we touched on, say, like men are looking for role models, men are looking for places to go, I guess, in their life. If it's you're not a huge fan of Andrew Tate, you're not a huge fan of that sort of messaging there as well, which a lot of obviously young men are kind of go down that path. Who do men go to then? They don't have the father. The school teachers are obviously mainly female. Where do men go if they don't have that role model in their life?
I mean, if you're looking for me to pull an amazing name out of the hat for you to follow, I'm going to disappoint you, because there really aren't that many that I know of. I mean, there's some great people doing some work in the same area as me, not many, but always highly recommend people like Richard Reeves, who's a policy wonk who writes a lot about men and boys, and he's the president of the American Institute of Boys and Men. And his book of Boys and Men, which is really good, and I have read it a few times, was just recommended by Obama. Obama just gave him a shout out as one of his books to read, so that's pretty good. Richard Reeves is great, but I mean, there aren't many other people. Warren Farrell was a good. He's like, Warren Farrell was sort of the last generation. Me, I recommend myself. That's the thing, is I joined this space because there were so few people here, or there's so few people here acting in what I felt was good faith. There are loads of people here trying to make a quick buck. A lot of men's rights advocates are just grifters, in my opinion. A lot of people in the men's mental health space are not there to help. They're there to make money. And that's a problem. I mean, that's been the overall narrative I've seen. That a lot of people that are just bullshit, lying, like just inauthentic, but not all of them. So I'll give you Richard Reeves. But more so, I'm not wanting to fall into like some overly poetic, flowery language, but it's not down to some TikToker or some author or politician to solve these problems in many ways. A lot of them we can do ourselves. You don't need to be a role model to text your mate and see how he's doing, or go for a chat, or go for a drive in the way I described. That doesn't need to come from Richard Reeves or Andrew Tate. There's nothing stopping you from, when this podcast finishes, of just texting a friend or saying how they're doing, or just saying hi to a random man you meet on the street, or to your partner, like showing some compassion or giving a bit of space for men to talk. That's what we can all do right now, and we should do it. That's the ground up approach. The grassroots approach is a lot more realistic, because there are so few genuinely good role models in this area. We've already been betrayed by a lot of feminist advocates. The right are just harping on about Andrew Tate and the rest. And I'm like, who the hell is left? Who is left? So I would encourage us to pick up that challenge ourselves and become our own role models. As Gandhi said, become the change you want to see. So I'd say you can be the role model. I can be the role model. People listening can be a role model for men.
Yeah, well, that's good, because it takes, once again, that's a widespread approach that can be done as well. And I think also, to your point about how the right and the left, and once again, these are, to me, I personally, as an Aussie, I think these are pretty new terms to me to try, and I don't even know necessarily what they massively mean. You can get the broad and the general understanding, but it's the fact of, like, if you go around and you get outside these social echo chambers, because obviously social media boosts and loves when you have an extreme opinion on one side, that sells just like the normal media. Is that when you have the conversations with these people on the street, there's probably more people sitting in the middle, and that's where you're going to find your good role models anyway.
Yeah, a lot of them are afraid to share their point of view because they don't want to get browbeaten or shouted down or shamed. So they'll keep their perfectly normal, moderate opinion to themselves, that leads people who are making all the noise to think that they have the support of the majority, which they don't. They're just loud. You're just disproportionately loud. That's all you are. And people that disagree with you haven't got the energy to respond, and understandably so. Why would they? So there is comfort in the fact that there are undeniably a lot more people that support these points of view, that are just members of the public, normal people, normal good people that agree. These are horrific things. The issue is not trying to get people to care. The issue is making them understand what's going on, and the caring bit they'll do for themselves. Yeah. So I think that's been. I mean, a lot of people, even a lot of radical people, can have their minds changed. Like, often I'll get someone that I'll be talking to on Reddit, and they'll say on a different subject as well, and they'll be like, "I've just seen your page, and I think it's disgusting. I'm ending this conversation here." And I'll be like, "Okay, that's okay, I understand. Best of luck." And then a few days later, they'll come back and they'll be like, "Hey, I've been looking at your posts, and I've actually had some realizations, and I thought maybe you want to chat to them, chat about it." And I was like, I don't agree with everything, but there are certain things I hadn't considered or didn't know. And I'm like, oh, okay. It sounds like you're open to changing your mind. It sounds like a few of these things, at least, maybe you're open to changing your mind. So I wouldn't say the battle's lost even for the radicals, but absolutely there are a lot of normal people that do care about men, but just don't know the full extent of what we've discussed. So the issue is raising awareness.
Yeah. And I think the world needs a few more people with an open mind, or the ability to try and have an open mind as well. So that'll definitely be very beneficial. Yeah,
I hope so. Yes, to that.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate your time, George. Like, the work you're doing is very, very beneficial to not just men, to the whole world. Obviously, putting that awareness out there. So, first, I wanted to thank you for that, but then also thank you for your time and the ability to spread this message to even more people as well.
Thanks, Jordan. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thanks, Ben.